I'm just a boy from Kansas out to save the world from chronic disease. And I truly mean that. Nobody is in control of your health but you. I can't heal you. Your doctor can't heal you. You have to heal you. And it's all about having the education and empowerment to know what you need to be changing within yourself, within your life, to set your soul free and accomplish that best life that we all like to talk about. And I truly believe that the greatest medicine of all is to teach people how not to need it. I'm Brendan Vermeyer, the original Holistic Savage. Welcome to the Holistic Savage podcast. Perfect. All right, guys, welcome back to the Holistic Savage podcast, where we like to talk about all things functional medicine, functional fitness, functional spirituality, and functional psychology, because I truly believe the best medicine of all is to teach people how not to need it. So as always, I have a super amazing guest. And, every episode, I just get beside myself with excitement because I know so many cool people, which is honestly how this podcast started. Is I was like, well, you can only work with people one-on-one, and that line never ends. So if we really want to have a greater impact, I was like, I need to start sharing all this amazing expert knowledge from all my friends. So I have my friend Krishnan, the Chief Scientific Officer of Microbiome Labs, with us today. Kiran, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for having me. And, and I just want to reiterate what you said in the beginning, how important it is to do these kind of programs where you're getting the word out to a larger mass of people. And that's why I'm always excited and do whatever I can to join these kind of programs, because really at the end of the day, the future of healthcare is going to be in empowering people to understand their bodies, understand how things work, understand how the world around us impacts them, and then how to advocate for themselves, right? I mean, we can't count on our doctors and practitioners to keep us healthy. Most of the decisions you make throughout your day-to-day lives will have an impact on your health in some way or the other. And understanding how those decisions make those impacts are going to be really important in making sure we don't need medicines and we don't need procedures and all that. So thank you for having me. That's a long way of saying I appreciate the opportunity to be able to come on and nerd out a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. We're gonna nerd out real hard. And you're so right. Something I think it says it in the trailer for my podcast, but I kind of get fiery and I'm like, nobody can heal you but you. It's not your practitioner or your doctor's job to heal you. They can't do it. And I think we've really missed something where we've kind of displaced oh, no, we look outwards for somebody else to do things to it. And it's no, you have to heal yourself, treat yourself. And that's why this, whole Holistic Savage podcast kind of encompassing everything, functional medicine, but also the psychology, the spirituality, because that's the whole holistic model. Is we recognize how everything's interconnected. So I always like to kind of tell a brief background story of how I know my guest rather than a super formal bio. So I have to tell this story where, we didn't officially meet at the FDN conference last year, but you were there. And I knew who you were. And I remember I had just gotten my cute little award for something. And, I sit back down and, you're wearing this awesome suit and you get up there. And I don't remember the joke that you said. I was like, who's this guy? Who's man? I was just, he's a charming, sharp, charismatic dude. And then over the course of this year, I think we've run into each other probably 5 times at all the different conferences and stuff. And you really are just a super authentic, genuine dude. And I love how, because let's be real, a lot of people, you start getting that ego, you start doing big things, and you start losing connection with reality and the people that you say you're trying to help. But literally every time I talk to you, you're always very generous with your time, your energy. You make people feel heard. And I think that's definitely a major reason why you are doing such big things, is you aren't losing that touch of humanity and unconditional love.
Oh, well, thank you so much. First of all, that's really kind of you to say. And I do remember, and congratulations on that award that you had won at the FDN conference. Much deserved. And we did get to connect via email, I think, after that, or Messenger, one of the many technical ways of connecting these
Yeah.
days. But at the end of the day, one of the things, my view on all of this is, it's not at all about me, right? And you do see that, right? As people gain certain levels of notoriety or success, as we may deem it, it can go to your head, and it becomes then about you, and it becomes about you and your brand and your value and all of this stuff. And to me, I mean, I'm still that kid running around the villages of India. I'm no different than that little kid who didn't know anything at that point, and had nothing but one roller skate. And I didn't even have a pair of roller skates. And so it's really about what we can do to affect the people around us. And one of the things that microbiome science show is that if you have a healthy microbiome, you actually have more of an altruistic worldview, and there is a benefit in your own health for improved community structure and improved impact on the people around you, right? So you could be, focus on yourself and really, centric around your own world and what's going on with you. That actually has a negative impact over time versus the idea of going out there and being there for other people. That actually has a bigger impact on your overall health. And there's biochemistry behind that, because in part, humans, part of our way of being successful throughout the course of evolution was that cooperative nature of humans.
Right.
In the same way ants do it, in the same way other, more lower ordered creatures do it, where they can maintain success because they maintain community, they support one another, and each individual is out there looking out for others versus themselves completely. And so, of course, you have to look out for yourself to some degree, but having that kind of community mind and not getting inflated is something that I think is extremely important. So thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate it. It's always going to be about what can we do for other people around us, right?
Yeah, I love that we started that way, because I think that almost is probably one of the biggest focal points I like to really highlight. I think what's really fun and exciting about kind of the functional medicine industry is the line in between objective hard science versus kind of the out there, the divine intuition, the spirituality. That line is getting really blurry because we're blazing trails we're really starting to see a lot of objective evidence that really reiterates things that I think we've always intuitively known and valued and understood as a species, a tribal species, a species that really operates from a community sort of biological function. And I think that's what's going to be really fun about getting into this conversation of how, the way our microbiome is working as this, this colony, this community. And, we love to take that reductionistic, like, oh, well, this bacteria is bad. And it's like, well, it's part of the bigger picture. And I think what's really cool about what you just said is we just immediately zoomed out to look at the bigger picture. And, does positive psychology and being not self-centered, how does that improve gut health and vice versa? And the thing is, we don't necessarily always know, but like, it doesn't always really matter because it all goes in hand. And as we cultivate all the above, we're going to see that improved growth and health and all the above. So you're a research microbiologist by trade, yes?
Yeah, exactly.
So that was your background. You're in college doing research and all about microbiology.
All about bugs and working on a small scale. Working in petri dishes and tissue culture systems, and that was really fascinating to me. I loved getting down to the smaller structures and understanding what's happening mechanistically between our cells and microbes and how they influence us and how they influence one another and those community structures, because bacteria are so fascinating. If you think about it, bacteria were the original life forms on this planet,
Yeah.
over 3 billion years old. They are still the predominant life form. And then they control more complex life forms like ourselves,
Hmm.
right? The moment we think we are that cool, that we're at the top of the evolutionary ladder, we're top of the food chain, we're so smart, we do all of these amazing things. But when it comes down to it, what we have to realize is we are really controlled by bacteria.
Hmm.
A rogue microbe can end us like this, or the thousands of microbes that work together to make us function, they play a significant role in us being human. But they're just such simple creatures. They're single cell organisms with
Hmm.
not a lot of complexity to them. But the way they function and the reason why they're so powerful is because of their community structures. And so that is a really important thing. I think there's a famous Nobel laureate microbiologist that said that even through the apocalypse, there are really only going to be a couple of creatures that will survive, and it's going to be ants and termites, and I think something like cockroaches, and the one common thing among all of these organisms that will survive through an apocalyptic event is that they are really community-driven organisms. They work together. Each one on them by themselves is not all that special, but when you put them together and their resources together, they become really significant. So understanding that part, then with my research, I wanted to go bigger and bigger and bigger. I spent a lot of time working on this minute, and then I wanted to go to the clinical level.
Hmm.
And that's how I got into the clinical research side of things, because I wanted to see, understanding the minute mechanisms, how does that impact bigger picture outcomes, health outcomes and so on. So right after leaving university research, first thing I did was founded a CRO, which is a clinical research organization, to do contract clinical work for nutritional and food companies. So I started designing and running my own human clinical trials on behalf of other companies, and trying to come up with more clever ways of actually doing trials, because trials are really expensive.
Hmm.
And most clinical trials are designed around the pharmaceutical method, and the outcomes and the way you power a trial, meaning how many people you need in the trial to make it significant, so on. All those things are designed around pharmaceutical mechanisms. And so we wanted to take a step back and really kind of take a smarter approach to nutritional research that didn't require as much money, didn't require as large studies, and also looked at different outcomes than, say, common disease outcomes.
Hmm.
So that's how then I jumped into this whole world of, supplements and nutrition and all that. I became a researcher in the space.
Hmm. I love that though, and so glad that you did. And I think that's what's really cool too is there really is that space. There's the people in the lab doing research to have that objective data to validate what we think and our hypothesis, and
Mhm.
and then it's like the practitioners, clinicians, doctors. They're they're kind of on the front lines, and there's a
Mhm.
lot of experimentation. And I think there chances are I'm going to ruffle some feathers in this podcast, but I like to consider myself like truth seeker. At least I
Mhm.
like to, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of crazy stuff that goes down in probably any industry. But it's at the end of the day, like, what drives positive clinical outcomes.
Yeah.
We have to have the objective data to support that, and then we also kind of have to blaze those new trails. And I like what you said about we like to think we're so smart, because one thing I try to live by is, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Right. Yeah. I
But
like
I always tell people, listen to your gut and go with what that says. Obviously, kind of a old school line, but at the end of the day, I always joke like, no, your gut's way smarter than you. So like,
that. Right.
don't try to fight it. Your microbiome is way smarter than you.
Yeah.
And I think also too, we're kind of at this point where I think our technology with like testing, and we'll definitely have to talk about stool testing at some point. But our technology has kind of surpassed our understanding in a lot of ways. I think with you see all these different labs trying to kind of measure and quantify and isolate all these different bacterial strains, and then extrapolate some sort of clinical recommendation from that. And I feel like I'm seeing a lot of people chasing bugs.
Mm-hmm.
They're chasing bugs, and it's like, but is that actually, driving positive clinical outcomes?
Yeah.
So your main company, Microbiome Labs. I'd love to hear kind of the 101 for those that aren't familiar. Although I'm pretty sure most of my listeners probably would be familiar. But Microbiome Labs, tell us about, like, you had your initial product with the Megaspore, and that's where
Right.
the legend begins.
Yeah. So the company really was born out of a pure need. I had never imagined that I would have my own brand or product company out there. That wasn't part of the plan. We were perfectly happy being behind the scenes, doing the science for other companies, helping companies develop products. It's a whole other ball of wax when you go in front of the curtain rather than behind the curtain, and you start talking about a brand that has your name and your stuff associated with it. So that was never really part of the plan, but we were hired by a large multinational company to study the probiotic marketplace and to study probiotics in general, like the way people were going about developing probiotics, the approach that was taken, and whether or not the formulations made sense. Did we need 200 billion or do we need 50 billion? Is there a difference? Do we need 17 strains or 25 strains or 3 strains? And should it be refrigerated or non-refrigerated? Those are all kind of the basic questions that this company had in trying to understand what should be a next generation of probiotics. And so going through all of that, we found a lot of dysfunction in the marketplace. We found that the vast majority of probiotic products were put together in a way that I call kitchen sink formulation, right? It's basically like, let's just throw a whole bunch of stuff in here without any real specific rhyme or reason for why these strains are all put together. And then the other thing that's really interesting is if we look at the vast majority of probiotics on the marketplace, they're based on Lactobacillus, right, and Bifidobacteria. But let's take Lactobacillus because Lactobacillus is still the predominant probiotics genus out there. And then there's several species that are used, but the predominant genus is Lactobacillus. And then I started thinking, like, why are we dominated by Lactobacillus as far as our therapeutic use of bacteria? Because when you think about it and you really look at the human microbiome, Lactobacillus makes up less than 1% of your total microbiome, right? What about the other 99% of genus and species that are in the gut? Why is it that every product on the shelf is basically a Lactobacillus product? And then you start to dig back into the history and you kind of understand, okay, that's what came from dairy fermentation. That's where it started. And then somebody in the 60s decided to take the dairy fermenting bugs, which Lactobacillus is good at doing, and then isolate them and put them in capsules and create this category of oral probiotics. And then every company just kind of builds on that same mentality, without thinking beyond it and going outside of the box and going, is there something else in the gut that could possibly be beneficial? Something outside of this 0.9% of the genus that's actually in the system, right? And so, we saw all of these problems, and most of them aren't surviving through the gastric system. All the refrigerated stuff is kept alive because it's in a refrigerator, and then the moment you put them into your 98.6 degree body, it dies. So all of that stuff was a big confusion. And when we came back to the company that hired us to do this work, and we kind of put together a big report on it, they said, this work is great, but we just got acquired by a larger company, and so we're not going to be doing anything with this. And so we said, okay. That left us with the understanding that there's this multi-billion-dollar market growing rapidly that was really going in the totally wrong direction. So do we sit around and go, well, we did our work, what we were hired to do, or do we go, we should try to make a change in this space? And so our first instinct, again, with the complete hesitation of doing our own brand, our own product, we actually went to other companies in this space and said, hey, here's the information we found out. Here's what we think the next generation of probiotics should be like. We're here to help and recommend and formulate and so on. We talked about 4 or 5 companies and they all passed on it. They didn't really get it. They also were vested in the old way. They had 3, 4 different brands in the market that had kind of the old story of probiotics. And so we said, you know what, we're going to have to do this ourselves. And then myself and my business partner, Tom, who you've met, who is a functional medicine practitioner. He's a chiropractor that focused on the gut for the last 20 years and had used virtually every probiotic on the market, and wasn't really finding anything that really helped him that much in the clinical setting. We said, we got to do this. And so that's how we started Microbiome Labs, was purely from that need to start making a change and trying to drive the industry in a different direction. Or at least open up a new direction, so that we could start expanding our view on what bacteria are in the gut, what can be therapeutic, what should be used, and taking a different approach to it. So that's basically how we started the company, and it was purely out of just a significant need.
Yeah.
To switch lanes, and because a part of it is I have a very, very strong belief that bacteria are going to be our salvation to a lot of things, because bacteria can be the cause of a lot of things, and bacteria control so many things. And so if we're not utilizing them properly, we're really missing a huge toolbox in our set of equipment to make ourselves healthier.
Totally. I love that origin story. So cool. And, I think the universe kind of works in mysterious ways where it presents your path, and you're kind of stumbling around in the dark, and then, you feel that ray of something that feels right. And so I love that, where it's like, the universe is shining upon you of like, I know you don't want to step into, but, you rose to the challenge, and here we are. You're traveling the world, lecturing constantly, and doing amazing things. And so with the next generation of probiotics, maybe just like the basics on, bacillus strains and the spore-based biotics, because so many people always are asking, because we're still in that transition. I think you guys are having a tremendous impact, but there are still a lot still stuck in the, oh no, you need 100 billion colonies of your bifido-lacto, blend, whatever. So why spores?
Yeah. So, when we started looking at, okay, what should be a probiotic, or what should be the next generation of probiotics, we asked ourselves a simple question, and that's, where did our ancestors get their bacterial exposure? Where did they get their probiotics from? Because this really intimate and unique relationship we have with bacteria in our system doesn't occur overnight. It occurs over thousands of years of coevolution. We're in a place where we give out a lot of the control of our immune system to bacteria, which is insane, because the immune system is the only system we have in our body to protect us from the world around us. And yet our bacteria, foreign entities, if you will, control that immune system. It's the same as putting 100% of our control, or even 60 or 70% of the control of our military to another country.
Yeah.
That's the analogy one would use to understand what's going on in this relationship with bacteria. Every part of our body is covered in microbes. People used to think that urine is sterile, your blood system is sterile, the womb is sterile. None of those things are sterile. In our blood, for every 5 mLs of blood, you've got over 1,000 bacteria cells in there. And we have around 5,500 milliliters of blood. So do 5,500 times 1,000. That's how many bacteria cells we have floating around in our blood. 10, 15 years ago, if a doctor saw bacteria in your blood, they'd be freaking out that you're having sepsis or some sort of bacterial poisoning, right? And so that kind of intimate, intricate relationship that we have with microbes has occurred over millions of years of evolution, and it's done through pure happenstance and pure significant exposure. Right? If we weren't exposed to microbes all the time, we wouldn't have this relationship with them. And so we know, with a great sense of understanding where a lot of microbes in our gut come from. They come from the birthing process, through mom, passing through the vaginal canal, early interactions with mom and dad and community, members within the first couple of years of life. That all helps establish our microbiome in our gut, on our skin, in our eyes, mucosal tissue, and so on. But the rest of our lives, we are exposed to microbes in the outside environment. And our simple question was, does the environmental bacteria in some way play a role as a probiotic, or even play a role in our overall health and wellness? And then you start to see these kind of population studies that were done in Japan and in Russia and all that, where they compared the overall health outcomes, the diversity and strength of the microbiome, and so on between people who lived in urban areas and rural areas. And the clear difference between urban and rural areas is the exposure to environmental bacteria. People in urban areas tend to live in more sterile environments, in concrete buildings and jungles. People in the rural areas live in farms that are far more exposed to the outside environment. So looking at those things, it became clear that there's empirical data and to some sense, real objective data that being exposed to environmental bacteria has a beneficial impact on your constitution. So we said then, okay, what microbes within the environment could actually play a role as a probiotic? And as it turns out, the vast majority of microbes in the environment can't act as a probiotic because most of them will die going through your gastric system, and your gastric system is designed to do that. You get then, instead of whole live microbes that you're being exposed to, you get fragments of microbes that you're exposed to. And that actually can have a beneficial impact on your system. It has a method of upregulating some of your immune responses. It can change some of the DNA expression within your microbiota. So it has kind of this daily jolting of your system type of response. But very few microbes within the environment actually have this natural capability to survive this harsh gastric system. And for those of your listeners that don't really understand how harsh this gastric system is to a microbe, first it has to pass through the acid wash in your stomach. The hydrochloric acid in your stomach is so potent that if you could touch it with your finger, it would burn off the tips of your skin. You would lose your fingerprints, if you will, right? So that's how strong it is. And it essentially kills bacteria. Then if it makes it past that somehow, then the next thing that kills bacteria is your bile salts. Bile salts are really strong antimicrobials. And then after that, it's a pancreatic enzyme. So before you can even get to the site of action, you've got these three major gauntlets to get through as a microbe in order to get into the intestines as a living organism. So our view is, if there's a microbe that is naturally adapted to making it past all of those checkpoints, then there must be some evolutionary significance for them to function in the gut. That's where the spores came in. So we started finding that within the environment, there are these bacteria that have these natural spore formation capability. They cover themselves in this protein calcified armor-like system, and that allows them to survive through this gauntlet. And then we started looking for evidence that these spores have benefit within the gut. And then, as it turns out, they've been used in Europe and Latin America in the prescription drug market for over 60 years. And so we saw that, they have significant impact in the gut. They have been used for a long period of time. They're naturally designed to survive through the gastric system, which is what you want to look for in a natural probiotic. And we were just not utilizing them in the US. And so we kind of honed in on the spores and said, okay, what all can we learn about these bacteria and what all can they do in the gut? And we started to find some really fascinating functions that they had within the gut. And these are functions that we've largely outsourced to these bacteria because we can't do them ourselves.
It's intense stuff. You kind of start feeling sorry for these microorganisms as they're trying to make it through the gauntlets, like the Gladiator, Indiana Jones, or something like that.
Totally, yes.
But, and that's kind of the big thing. A lot of people, again, are still caught in that mindset of just billions of colonies down the throat. But if none of them are actually making it down into the intestines, then it's kind of...
It's not changing the microbiome, right? So our whole goal, and the reason why we called the company Microbiome Labs, was the idea of really understanding the microbiome, and then understanding the community structures within the microbiome, and then ultimately how those community structures impact health. And then when we understand how the community structures impact health, then we can go in with ways of intervening or modulating the community structure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the basic premise behind what we do, and it started with the spores, because as it turns out, in the prescription world, they use the spores as a treatment for gut infections.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So one of the first stories actually on Bacillus subtilis, one of the most well-studied bacterial strains in the world, not only just spore, but well-studied bacterial strains. Everyone that's going into microbiology research, there are two bacteria that you end up working with early on in your training. One is E. coli and the other is Bacillus subtilis.
Mm-hmm.
These are the two most well-studied and well-understood bacteria in the world, hands down, and we use it a lot in microbial research. So Bacillus subtilis is one of the main spores that we work with. And one of the early stories on how it was discovered as a potential therapeutic tool for gut infections was during World War II. The German army was in North Africa. That was part of their campaign. And the German soldiers were getting killed off, not by the war, but by dysentery and infections from the water and so on. They also noticed that the locals, the North Africans, when they would get sick or they would get stomach upset, what they would do is they would take dried camel dung and they would consume it. And that dried camel dung has this therapeutic benefit in the gut. And so they took a bunch of dried camel dung back, and then they tried to isolate compounds within the dried camel dung that actually had this inhibitory effect in the gut of infections, and they found that it was Bacillus subtilis. The camel's picking this up from all over the environment, and it's fermenting in its gut, and it's coming out in the dung, and it's in spore form, and it's survived through the entire camel's digestive process, and it's come back out into the environment as a living organism. And that's where the first bacillus-based probiotic was launched. It was launched as a prescription treatment for dysentery, for gut infections. And so we understanding that, if you understand that the bacteria can somehow find pathogenic or infective bacteria within this milieu of hundreds or trillions of bacteria cells, then it has real special capability of reading the microbial environment. And that's something called quorum sensing, which is a really fascinating area of study where microbes and cells all read one another's chemical signatures to understand who's there and in what amounts and so on. So they read the community structure. So these spores have this amazing ability to go in, read the community structure, find this infective bacteria among the trillions of other bacteria that are there, hone in on them, and bring their levels down. So having that capability, it stood to reason to us that if they can find bad bacteria and bring their levels down, perhaps they can also enhance the good bacteria that aren't performing in the levels that they should be. And so that was kind of our reasoning, and so we started studying the ability of these spores to change that microbiome community and change the output of the community as measured by things like short-chain fatty acids and gas production, and all of these things we know have an impact on our health. So that's that was kind of our clinical and scientific reasoning on how we approach making an impact on the microbiome. And it starts with using these spores and their ability to read and change the microbiota.
So cool, so fascinating, and that's kind of the thing. I think sometimes it's easy, and again, maybe that's a human ego phenomena where we get so hyper focused on isolated things that we lose sight of the bigger picture. Because when you look at nature, hey, something about nature works because we're here today, and it definitely seems the farther that our species gets from more kind of natural living, the worse things get. And I think
Absolutely.
That's why, gut health, like, back in the day when I started my career, if you knew anything about hormones, you were like, cool. It was real cool. Whereas now, you see everybody's talking about gut health. And of course, with any kind of, popular new subject, there's going to be bandwagons that maybe are headed for a cliff. But overall, though, the spreading awareness is good. And I think in today's world we just have this like slash and burn mentality, and definitely in like the clinical world, a lot of like, okay, infection, like go kill. And I remember you were doing, I think it was for Rebel Health Tribe or something. It was like the first time I'd really heard you present on like the total gut restoration system.
Yeah.
And, you just had this Like, why are we always trying to kill? Why are we not trying to change the environment, modulate the environment, boost the short chain fatty acids? Like, let's improve, because and that's something I train all my practitioners is like, there's a big difference between we're going to kill stuff versus we're trying to really heal the gut. We're trying to change the community. And I think that's what's so cool. I love studying your products and how they work, because these things are so intelligent. And again, we're talking about bacteria that they've been around a lot longer than us. And the quorum sensing, super cool. And it's almost like we're dropping these like Navy SEAL spores down in there, and they start working magic. And I think it's starting. I mean, in the functional world, it's very well acknowledged and accepted. And I say it all the time of like, okay, gut health is the foundation of your overall metabolic health. But I think that's kind of the big thing is like, is there any chronic disease that isn't somehow connected back to all these little critters in our body?
Yeah, and that's a really important question to ask. And so I did an interview recently with Jeffrey Smith. I don't know if you know him from the big GMO. He's the guy that's been out there anti-GMOs, anti-Roundup for years now, doing a lot of work in that area. And I did a interview with him. And he sprung this on me where he had about 37 or 38 common conditions. And we did a rapid fire thing where he named the condition and he wanted me to kind of name, is there a connection to the microbiome and can I explain it? And we did. And every one of the conditions he named, they're somehow tied back to the microbiome. And if you look at, the name of your brand, the Metabolic Solutions, when we think about our metabolic processes within our body, some of the latest estimates are over 90% of all our metabolic function is coded for by bacterial DNA rather than our own DNA, right? We have 150 times more bacterial DNA in our system than human DNA. And so all of these proteins that we make, all of these enzymes and coenzymes and, all of these compounds that affect our metabolic system, which makes us human, most of those are conducted by bacterial DNA and RNA in many instances as well. So we really have to respect and understand that nature has kind of created this organism that we are. This holobiome is a word I love to use. It means a super organism. We're a walking, talking rainforest. We're made up of thousands of microecologies that all have to work and communicate together in order to perpetuate the health of the whole. And the moment we can kind of understand and start putting ourselves back into the environment that we're supposed to be in, that's when we'll start to see profound changes in our overall health. One of the analogies I always give, often at talks that I do, is that we are a microbial construct. Right? We are predominantly bacteria. We are predominantly bacterial DNA. We are predominantly bacterial metabolic capability. And we know that every single square millimeter of our body is covered with some sort of bacteria that functions to keep that area functioning. And all of these microbial communities that we are made up of have to communicate and work together in order to keep us healthy and functioning. So we are a microbial construct without a doubt. And we've taken this elegant microbial construct and put it in an antimicrobial world. Right? Everything around us that we have designed kills the way we're made.
Yes.
Right. And so we were really constantly shooting ourselves in the foot. And so with that in mind, my push has been, let's remember the ecology of our body. Let's go back to trying to balance the ecology rather than slash and burn. And the thing is, functional medicine, which is what I love and I think is really the future of healthcare and medicine, does still have its umbilical cord to allopathic medicine. Right. Because even within functional medicine, we want to follow those same regimens, right? It becomes easier to practice if you have tests, intervention, test, intervention, test, intervention. And then often interventions are kill, stop this, intervene there. And that's more of an allopathic approach still, right? And like take SIBO, for example, right? The vast majority of SIBO therapy right now is about killing bacteria in the small bowel.
Yep.
That's what everyone is doing. And that's really the answer so far. My question that I keep asking in SIBO conferences and all that is, why are those bacteria there? Why are they overgrown? Why are we not going after the root cause, which is what functional medicine should be about, of why this problem exists in the first place? We are so focused on the distension and the discomfort and the bloating, and how do we stop the bloating, and can we kill? Should we use antibiotics? Should we use a combination of antibiotics and antimicrobials? Should we eliminate the diet of nutrients that can be fermented, which is so important for your large bowel, just to manage the symptom of bloat, right? And so in many instances, we will go full allopathic, even in the functional medicine world, and focus so much on the symptom rather than going back to the root cause and going, what's wrong with the fundamental ecology here, where these microbes are allowed to be there and allowed to be overgrown? There is a root cause to it, and that's one of the things I try to talk about as much as I can.
Yeah, no, I love that, and you're so right. That's something where like my background and my tribe of practitioners and everything, because I see that a lot, where a lot of more medical background people that get into the functional space, it is still a very kind of allopathic and at times reductionistic, whereas I do find that sometimes people that are coming into the functional space more from like a holistic health coaching type of background, they seem to, I don't know, the thought process is different, the critical thinking is different, kind of a more natural hierarchy to the way that biology should be. And instead of kind of like, oh, we have control, we can control, and it's like, we don't really have a lot of control. I think we need to realize nature is a lot smarter than us. But as you said, we're operating in this sterile world of C-section, you get cut out and then immediately wiped down and pumped full of vaccines and antibiotics, and it's a mess, it's a nightmare. And so I feel like has gut health in our microbiology ever been more compromised or more under threat? And absolutely, there's such a overwhelming amount of evidence with all sorts of chronic diseases, because like we're not our species isn't dying off because of these crazy acute things. It's these chronic, it's the autoimmunity, it's the cancer, it's the heart disease, and every single one of these things, as you were saying, we can link back to microbiome related imbalances. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that connection, so people understand that more of chronic inflammatory diseases and compromised GI health, endotoxemia. I write a lot about this stuff on my blog and everything, and then I think we'll have to talk about ketosis too at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important. If you look at like still the top 4 or 5 things that kill people in the Western world: heart disease, diabetes, cancer, osteoporosis, all of these chronic illnesses, and then autoimmune disease. And it's interesting to look at that we've actually created diseases for ourselves in the last couple of decades that we didn't previously have to deal with, right? Yeah. So 30 years ago, there were something like 25 or 30 known autoimmune diseases. Yeah. And then now we've got over 110 new different autoimmune diseases. So in the last 30 or so years, because of our corrupt way of surrounding ourselves with things that destroy our ecology, our inner ecology, that we've kind of created new conditions that we have to deal with. And everything, diabetes, which used to be thought of as just nothing but hyperglycemia to poor diet, and then all of a sudden you end up with type 2 diabetes, or heart disease, which used to be thought of like a plumbing issue. You're getting too much fat in your diet, it's accumulating in your arteries, and you're closing up your plumbing system, and that's going to lead to a heart attack. Cancer, which had a different frame of mind. All of these things are now understood to be inflammatory conditions, right? They're all driven by chronic low-grade inflammation, and the inflammation that serves one actually drives the other, and that's why many of these are called comorbidities, right? So typically, if you have diabetes, you have 4 times the risk now for heart disease, and 2.5 times the risk of cancer. Same thing if you have heart disease, you have double the risk for diabetes and you have double the risk for cancer. So all of these things go hand in hand, all because they come from the same origin. And when you look into the research and you kind of start really going backwards into where is this inflammation coming from, it all starts with the gut, right? The biggest source of chronic low-grade inflammation is that leakiness in the gut. And that is something that occurs over decades. And it persists over decades. And then it lays down the foundation for disease. Most autoimmune conditions are driven by it. Diabetes is driven by it, as is indicated and studied by the American Diabetic Association themselves. These big research institutes are usually the least progressive and are stuck in really old mentalities, right? It took the American Heart Association a long time to come around from the old 1950s Ansel Keys idea of dietary cholesterol, being the root cause of heart disease. They finally come around to it. It took them 50 years. But the American Diabetic Association has published more on the idea of leaky gut and endotoxemia driving diabetes than any other research organization. So they're getting more progressive, and because they're starting to see that their approaches have failed and the prevalence of these diseases continue to rise. And so then maybe they need to take a step back and look at different root causes. And same with the American Heart Association. They're showing that interleukin-1 beta is a major driver of the development and onset of heart disease. And a huge driver of interleukin-1 beta is endotoxemia, which arises from permeable intestines. So all of these conditions, including things like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, cancers, are all driven by this chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation comes from dysbiosis in the gut. And dysbiosis in the gut comes from the environment that we've put ourselves in, right? So we've got this really functional, amazing ecology of bacteria and viruses and protozoa and all of these things within our gut that protect us from this inflammation. But like you said, from day one, 35% of births are C-section. So babies are being pulled out without getting that proper inoculum. They're shot full of vaccines, like you said, which impacts the inoculum. They're, on average, the American child goes through 1 or 2 courses of antibiotics within the first 2 to 3 years of life. That has a huge impact on your microbiome. The chlorine in our drinking water, the fluoride in our drinking water, all the pesticides that are everywhere are all strong antimicrobials, all of the antimicrobials in your food sources. So everything around us is designed to destroy this ecology that's designed to protect us from inflammation. And so it rises with the tide of increased use of dysfunctional antimicrobials. The prevalence of these diseases continue to increase. There's a reason why these diseases are a modern phenomenon in first world countries, and you see the same prevalence rate in third world countries, right, where they are more concerned about things like malaria and E. coli and infections that we had under control for a long time. They don't see the same chronic illness epidemic that we see, which comes from antimicrobial world that we've put our microbial system in, and that microbial system can no longer function to stop the leakiness in the gut.
Yeah, it was so well depicted, and it's terrifying. I mean, the amount of glyphosate in the environment or the antibiotics and vaccines. And definitely whereas the functional medicine and holistic health space, we're all over this. We're all about, I don't know that everybody has their practices down yet, but we're getting there. But the general public still very wait, there's a connection between my depression and my gut health. There's a connection between, my diabetes, my heart disease, my Alzheimer's, whatever it is. And then, of course, too, and again, this is kind of where I have a lot of fun with this, as you know, my background as a trainer and nutrition dude. And to me, it was just like, how can I possibly help somebody reach their health goals without a more science based approach and having some objective data to go off? And so then, of course, too, you know, we have everybody when they think of, I want to improve my health, you know, what do? Well, they start working out, they eat less. You know, we're still caught in that diet and exercise thing. And this is something I'm super, I get fired up about, because I'm one of the few that really, okay, let me get out of the fitness industry and like, let's really get to the heart of what we need to do here. But then, of course, too, like with ketosis, which everybody's looking for that magical diet. And my God, have we overcomplicated nutrition? Holy crap,
Absolutely.
it's mind blowing. And, you know, keto, again, like when I started my career, if you were a keto person, you were cool. If you knew something about hormones, you were cool. Whereas now, oh my gosh, I just saw that, you know, after Paleo FX, there was like KetoCon or something like that. And everybody's raving about keto now. And, you know, from what I've experienced and read and looked into, it's like, oh, well, you know, when you've got saturated fat transporting lipopolysaccharides across the mucosal barrier and, you know, inducing more inflammation, like, shoot. So I'd love to hear, you know, what your thoughts are on diet and influencing our microbiome too.
Yeah, absolutely. So the keto thing is troubling to me, and you know, and I think people love. It's so much simpler to kind of fall into a camp, right? And when you're in a camp, you feel like you're part of a community again, and it's self perpetuating, and it uplifts your understanding. But again, and this happens in politics and sports and all of that stuff, right? Everybody has their team.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is you become blinded by just following one channel. The keto thing is interesting and where it came from, you know, and like you said, it was one of the things that's like a diet magic bullet, right? We've gone for a long period of time demonizing fat. Yeah. Right. And that was, of course, wrong in many different ways as well. And so now we've come kind of to the full end of that spectrum and going, fat is not bad. Fat is actually good. In fact, fat is so good, it should be the only thing you eat.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, we've
now we've gone
hard.
totally, we've gone nuts. We've swung to the other end, right? Yeah. And the thing is, you know, it helps you make a name for yourself if you are that extreme on things. You know, there's the carnivore diet now. It's kind of picking up steam. And talking about Paleo FX, I met people at Paleo, like a guy I met who's trying to deal with health issues and weight issues and all that. And his diet is he eats 2 steaks a day. That's it. Yeah, right. Yeah. And nothing else, like literally nothing else, just 2 steaks a day. And I'm like, holy cow. And he's like, you know, I read this book about the carnivore diet and it worked well for this one dude. And, you know, or so he claims. And so I'm like, well, that's, you know, you need a little bit more of an objective worldview on like this one person ate steaks and became healthy, so I'm going to do this all the time. So it's really interesting. Anytime to me a diet is named, it's likely not a good idea.
Right.
You know, like if you can go like, I am vegan, I am paleo, I am vegetarian, if there's a name to the diet, it's likely not supportive of overall natural functional health, right? Because our ancestors and throughout 99.9% of human evolution, we did not have the luxury to diet. We didn't have the luxury to just choose how we wanted to eat in a very narrow range and follow that, right? We were omnivores and we ate what we could. One of the things, and I explained this part of evolutionary biology to people a lot, one of the things that has allowed humans to move up the evolutionary ladder and up the food chain is the fact that we eat and can eat a lot of different things. We are omnivores. So take a lion, for example, right? Which is a lion is an obligate carnivore, right? Which means it cannot eat plant-based foods. Its system is not designed to absorb calories and get sustenance from plant-based foods. So a lion has to eat meat. And looking at the savannah, one of its main targets are like wildebeest, right? And if there's a drought and the wildebeest population is low, the lion is going to die because it doesn't have a food source. It can't go and start eating shrubs and start eating, insects and nuts. It will just die, and it drops down in the food chain and evolutionary ladder. Same thing with the wildebeest, which is an obligate herbivore. If there's a drought and its food source is not there, it's going to die. But the human in the savannah, if there's a drought, can start digging under the ground and looking for roots and tubers. It can start eating insects. Humans can eat termites.
Mm-hmm.
Humans can boil and drink the tea off a bark of a tree. We can do so many things to continue moving up the evolutionary ladder and the food chain because we are omnivores.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and we are designed clearly to eat a large variety of things. Studies show that our ancestors ate 600 different types of foods annually and seasonally. They ate what was available during the season. And so, that to me is the most important view on the whole idea of diet. It's eating real food, which is what I liked about the paleo movement, is that it focused on let's eat real food, right? Let's not eat stuff that is heavily packaged and marketed and processed and so on. But then, of course, people started heavily packaging and processing paleo food, right? Because now you have packaged paleo bars and snacks and all of this stuff. But the good foundation part of that movement was let's eat real food. Let's eat food that was not processed, not packaged in some way. And then let's eat a variety is the important thing. What happens with keto, and I get a lot of people telling me this all the time, is like, oh no, I went keto and my inflammation went down and I lost a bunch of weight. My explanation to them often is it's not the fact that you went to only eating fat or predominantly eating fat. It's the fact that you likely cut out a whole bunch of sugar out of your diet. A lot of times what you do in a keto is you replace the carbohydrates, you replace the sugar sources with fat. And that in itself can have a significant benefit. And same thing with veganism. If you go vegan and you all of a sudden go to just predominantly plants, you're going to see short-term benefit because you're cutting out stuff that had a negative impact on your system. But if you're vegan for more than a year or two, you're going to start seeing severe dysfunction within your system for the most part, right? You'll start to see nutrient deficiencies and things like that. I've talked to and worked with numerous people that are trying to recover from being vegans because their system, their teeth became brittle, their skin got affected, all of these things within them, they became low energy producers. And so that's my view in general. And there's going to be a big paper coming out showing the long-term impact on keto, which is a negative impact in general. And my thing is with people, try not to fall into a camp. Try not to fall into a named diet. Again, if the diet has a name to it, then it's likely not the be all end all of health and wellness. We are omnivores. We're supposed to eat a whole bunch of different things. And to me, the most important thing to focus on is eating the real food component to it. Less packaged stuff, less processed stuff, and actual food, actual vegetables, clean meats, clean eggs, clean nuts, these things that our ancestors would have foraged, gathered, hunted, and consumed.
Absolutely. And it's always funny. The best diet advice I give people, I give it to them for free. I should start charging like $1 or something, because I always just tell people, how about we eat like organic, plant, animal based food and eat when you're hungry, don't when you're not. Skipping breakfast. And now we're going to call it intermittent fasting, which is its own diet story. And she's, why are we overthinking it and overcomplicating it? And also too, it's certainly very well established and documented that our diversity of our microbiome is heavily associated with overall better health. And it's like, how do we encourage diversity of the microbiome? Well, probably diversity with our diet. I don't know. It makes sense in my head if I think about it for a second.
Right. Totally. It does.
So, well, shoot. I mean, we could literally talk all day. I know. Your time is extremely valuable. So I'd like to briefly talk about the total gut restoration system.
Yeah.
To kind of wrap things up a little bit, because we've got the spore-based biotics, and then we've got the prebiotic, which I love. I think it's in my drink over here. And then the Metabolic. Yeah. See, I love it. So you've created this, and I love your whole product line, but literally every single new client I get we do our intake, we get them started with our little holistic savage lifestyle challenge, crash course on all the basics. And then, let's get that total gut restoration system. Let's start modulating the microbiome. Let's start working on reconditioning. So I'd love to hear kind of the cliff notes of what this system is.
Yeah. So, and the really important part of it is we kind of took a pragmatic approach to what is happening that leads to that chronic inflammation, right? So, like we talked about, most chronic diseases are driven by this chronic low-grade inflammation, which starts with leakiness in the gut, which then starts with dysbiosis. So, all of it comes down to a significant disruption in our gut ecology. And that ecology is really important in maintaining the barrier function of our intestines. That's the mucosal barrier and the intestinal epithelium. And the regeneration and the maintenance of those really important barrier systems are dependent on the types of microbes that are in the system and the types of postbiotics or metabolic products that they produce. And so when we look back at the root cause, the true root cause of most of these chronic illnesses, it all comes down to a dysfunction in the mucosa, a dysfunction in the intestinal epithelium, the lining, which starts with a dysbiosis in the microbiome. And you can follow the pathology really clearly in numerous conditions. One of the things I do when I do my total gut restoration talk is I show the meta-analysis papers that have reduced the true root cause of all of these seemingly unconnected chronic illnesses to the same cause. Things like autoimmune disease and reflux and diabetes and cardiovascular disease and obesity. No one would have ever thought that their reflux has the same root cause as their anxiety, right? You would have never thought that your diabetes has the same root cause as your dementia risk. All of these things go together hand in hand. And so the total gut restoration is just a process of systematically reversing the dysfunction, because the dysfunction starts with dysbiosis, a low diversity, low keystone strains, which are these really important members of your microbiota that play a disproportionately important role in maintaining the ecology and the structure and function of the system. Those are like Akkermansia, Fecalum bacteria, Rhumnococcus. These important keystone strains are the ones that are inversely correlated with chronic illnesses. And there's numerous papers in longitudinal studies to show this. And so we went back and said, okay, can we start by fixing the dysbiosis? And can we increase diversity in the microbiome? Can we bring back these keystone strains? And can we increase the important postbiotics that they actually produce to maintain the structure of the system? And that's where the Megaspore comes in. We formulated Megaspore 6-7 years ago with the idea that it may do this, right? It was just purely by scientific rationale. We didn't have the data yet at the time. But now we actually, and this study just published, I think in the last month, which is a study, I think there's 7 of us that are authors on the paper. We've shown that when you combine the Megaspore and the prebiotic, you actually significantly increase diversity of the microbiome by about 40%, and you significantly increase the growth of these important keystone strains. So we're reversing the preliminary dysfunction, which is the dysbiosis. And then as we start to reverse that preliminary dysfunction, which is dysbiosis, we start to see that the mucosal layer and the integrity of the intestinal lining starts to come back. And so that's the first 2 steps of the total gut restoration. Is the spore-based probiotic, the Megaspore, which starts the fixing of the dysbiosis. Once we've given it enough time, which is typically 3 or 4 weeks in an average individual, some people need to go longer if they've needed to taper up on the Megaspore for a while because of Herxheimer reactions and so on. Once they get up to that full 2 cap a day dose for 3 or 4 weeks, they are now already making a significant shift in that microbial community where we can bring in the prebiotic that we've designed to specifically feed those keystone strains. We can bring in the prebiotic to reinforce that positive change within the microbiome. And then once you have that new community structure in your microbiome, that community structure that's associated with health, we can then provide it the tools that it requires to rebuild the mucosal layer and the tight junctions, which are certain types of amino acids, polyphenols, the IgG, and the other things that we've put into the mucosal rebuilding system. So it's a simple 3-step process to fixing the dysbiosis, to creating a new community structure within your microbiome, specifically a community structure that's associated with health and reducing that chronic illness, that chronic inflammation, and then providing that new community structure with the tools they need to repair that gut lining, and do so in a more permanent fashion. So it's a simple approach, but it just required kind of out of the box thinking and just going back to the basics of where are we going wrong, and do we have tools to repair this? And fortunately, as it turns out, the tools are working to repair it.
Yeah, and it's so brilliant, and it's amazing what can happen when we use a little critical thinking and evidence and all of that. Because I just think about one of my things I'm super passionate about is I feel like functional medicine is a little bit too much of a luxury. It's expensive to work with a practitioner privately, and we mentioned kind of a kitchen sink approach, and I see a lot of practitioners that take a shotgun approach, and it's just it's kind of like a lawyer. Like, here's my down payment of thousands of dollars, and we're going to run like 10 different tests. And I like to be a little bit more of the mindset of like, well, sometimes less is more. Let's work upstream. And that's what I love. So I haven't talked to you since it started, but I'm developing a advanced clinical course right now, and it's going to be featuring a lot of microbiome goodness in there. But that's the beautiful thing is I love to, I'll do my initial testing, primarily organic acids and some blood chemistry. And you might see, their insulin levels are at like 15 and their C-reactive protein is, 10 and, whatever. But it's beautiful where I do have all sorts of documented case studies of, well, gosh, we didn't even really like start a protocol. We put them through the gut restoration system. We did the basics with their lifestyle. And then, oh my gosh, their insulin, their C-reactive, everything.
Right.
And that's the beautiful part about it is just like, well, again, let's keep working. But, that's what I'm getting at, though, is I think that's one of the things that, I feel very passionate and synergistic with your mission in that what you're doing is helping a lot of people at a much lower price point. Because you look at the total gut restoration system of like $150 if you're buying all of them individually and stuff. Yeah. And it's like what that can do for their overall health, compared to, even just a stool test is like $500.
Totally, yeah.
So it's crazy, yeah. And then of course that's a whole separate conversation. But I love what you're doing, have the utmost respect for you, and certainly, a little bit of a role model. I'll admit, it's so cool.
Much, yeah. I really appreciate that, and I think the more practitioners kind of follow your path, I think it's going to impact more lives. And one of the limitations of functional medicine, like you mentioned, is that it is expensive.
Yeah.
Right. And so then we end up with this normal, which is unfortunately normal societal dysfunction, where people who have means have access to health, right? And that's how our system works. So the people that end up suffering the most are the people who don't have means. So they don't have means to buy the healthy food. They don't have means to be in a healthier environment. And then now they don't have the means to the type of medicine that can actually help them, right, which is functional medicine, right? So in part, the way we look at it is how do we make it more simplistic? How do we make it so that if someone can't afford to spend thousands of dollars with a functional medicine practitioner, is there something they can do that can actually have an impact on their overall health, on their kids' health, and so on? And that's where this kind of system kind of came from. Is let's simplify it to some degree and provide people with a tool that they can use that can have an overall impact on their health. But and then this kind of free information that you yourself and a lot of people put out there is also critical. Yeah. Because if you can't afford to go see a functional medicine practitioner and a doctor, you can tune in to a free podcast and listen and gain some understanding and gain some knowledge and advocate for yourself. So it's extremely important what you're doing as well as spending your time and doing these kind of recordings. I think is really critical, because what I do will never impact anyone unless I have a conduit to get it out to people like through yourself. So, I really appreciate the opportunities to be able to do this as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm honored. And again, I mean, you're a perfect guest. Like literally when it was like, all right, we're going to get this podcast going. We're going to get this off the ground. My first list of, like 5 names, I'm like, we've got to get Kiran on here. So it's super exciting. So I'm sure you're traveling all over the rest of the world, and hopefully, well, I know we'll run into each other at least once. We're both speaking at the FDN conference. Woo!
Looking forward to it.
September.
Are you able to come to the microbiome keynotes in September?
I sure hope so. I might be selected to go to the conference in Denver, the environmental health thing.
Oh yeah, okay.
Same weekend, but I threw my name on the list of like microbiome keynotes. Please pick me. So I'm going to try to make it there. I would love to, because I remember talking in New York, and there's going to be some serious swag at that thing.
Yes, it's going to be the swag bag is. Will have a retail value, I think, of over $500, and then you also get $150 in product credit, which comes with the registration fee. But if you're able to come, let me know. I'm happy to provide you a free registration anyway. Because the more people we have, because one of the things we're designing around this is just there's a lot of time where we're collaborating and having these kind of mini masterminds with the speakers that we're bringing that are kind of top-notch researchers in the microbiome world, some of whom we're actually working with right now on research projects. And what we're trying to do is kind of bridge the gap between the researchers out there in the academic world who are doing the microbiome research and the clinicians that are practicing the microbiome therapeutics. Because there's a big what we call translational gap between research and clinical practice. And one of our goals as a company is to bridge that gap. And so there's a lot of setup in the conference for people to collaborate and talk. And and I love your worldview on how functional medicine should be practiced. And I think that can, those kind of discussions will have a significant impact on what researchers are studying, in order to make what they're studying more practical and tangible for people that are practicing it. So that's what we're hoping to facilitate out of this conference. So I'd be honored if you're there, and you're there to participate in discussions and all that. So if you're able to come, if you don't have conflict, let me know. We'll send you an official invite to come.
I'm just going to say it now. I got to be at this thing. I can't not go.
Absolutely,
my jam. Yeah. Awesome. Well, shoot, man, I so appreciate your time. I really do. It's super valuable information. We'll definitely have a nice little link for the Total Gut Restoration System. I've got all those products on the site. But again, safe travels wherever you're headed next, out doing amazing. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll be in touch soon, my friend.
Thank you for the opportunity, Brandon. We'll take care.
Yeah, see you, man.
See ya.